We started off with the classical world. This is the Bacchante from the Museo delle Terme in Rome. It's a Roman copy of the Greek original. And you know now what it was all about. We've been through it. It was telling a story. It had an historia. It was telling a story. This is one of the followers of Dionysus. She's got her knife. She's looking down. She may have found the sacrificial victim over there. She has the jug of wine. It tells a story. The artists think of themselves not the way you think of artists, but the way you think of movie directors. They're telling stories with images, and it's tough to do. You've got to find one image, one burning image, which encapsulates the whole idea. You don't have 2.5 hours to put on a play. So they call themselves the sister art. They tell a story. And, unlike the dramatist who's stuck with whoever's available for acting, they have stories enacted by ideal beings that they have composed themselves out of the scattered excellences in humankind. Diverse e rare. Excellences are scattered, they combine it. So the art world stands on two legs. Why does art exist? It's always a rebut to Plato and the moralists and the political people who just want giant pictures of El Maximo Lider, as Fidel used to call himself. Art exists to give you better than you can get in real life. It is a sister art to drama, but it lasts forever, unlike drama. It transcends language barriers, unlike drama. We can understand this, and we don't speak Greek or Roman. We understand it today. It's acted by ideal beings. It's better than mere real things. And this so satisfies the West that for 2,300 years, nobody really debates this. Even when the classical world is replaced by Christianity, when the classical world falls apart, in the 300s, Christianity replaces it, and in the 400s, it falls apart. 410 AD is the traditional date of the sack of Rome. Traditional date of the sack of Rome. I'm going to pull this back slightly, get the picture larger. Yeah, there we go, that's good. Yeah, fine, sit down, take a seat. But it takes another 100 years for the Roman world to fall apart. It is during that early Christian time, before Rome has collapsed, and only Rome in the east is left, at Constantinople, which is later going to become Istanbul, that the very first picture appears of the crucifixion. They're not fond of that. It was a stumbling block, they felt, that was being laid in front of the Gentiles. They're not fond of the crucifixion. What is the first symbol? Do you remember? A lot of people have it on their cars down in Southern California. That fish. It pops up in the early 400s in a church in Rome. There are twin churches there, Santa Saba and Santa Sabina, carved on these gigantic doors, which are about 20 feet high. And here it is. Again, when the moral or the political people take over, whether they call themselves communists or Christians or whatever, they don't have any time for art. They can't quite get rid of it without looking like Philistines, but they use it. What is art going to do now? Pictures of role models. This looks crude, but actually, if you look at it as its message, it's quite sophisticated. This is Jesus being crucified in between the two thieves. You know the story, right? But you notice that Jesus seems to be, that the thieves seem tiny and Jesus seems to be twice as tall as they are. Important concept. This is called hierarchical size. And I'll spell it for you. Write it down. It's very important. Hierarchical size. Whoever is most important is done largest. This is just teaching. These are just signs. Hierarchy. H-I-E-R, hierarchical, A-R-C-H-I-C-A-L, hierarchical size. Since Jesus is so much more important, he's twice the size of the two thieves. Second, you notice that one thief is significantly taller than the other thief, which means he's more important. In the original, earliest Gospels, on the cross, both thieves cursed Jesus out. But in St. Paul, the one influenced by St. Paul, the Gospel according to Luke, one of the thieves instead gives the other thieves a moral lesson. It says, we are guilty and we deserve to be here, but he is innocent, and very improbable that that's what it says. And then he says that he believes in Jesus, and Jesus says, you'll be with me in my kingdom. It's never too late to repent. That's the idea. Even when you're on the cross and dying for being a thief, he's confessed he is, and then he says he repents and he believes in Jesus. And Jesus accepts him. There were an awful lot of Roman soldiers who took heart listening to that, you can imagine. So he's larger. And we know this is the Gospel according to Luke. There is another key to this. Those of you guys who come out of the Spanish or the Philippine tradition, does this look similar to the Jesus that you've seen on the front of your churches? Fernando? What?
Yeah.
Oh, really? That Jesus. Look at the pose. No, look at the pose. Look at the pose. Anybody know what I'm talking about here?
Yeah.
What does Jesus usually look like at the front of the church? Imitate him. Imitate him. None of you know? Well, Robert, we're going to have to cut this out of the tape. I'm obviously, what can I do? Jesus is usually, now think about it, isn't he usually like that, right? That is called, and write this down because it's a big discussion, Christus, C-H-R-I-S-T-U-S, Christus patiens, the suffering Christ, P-A-T-I-E-N-S, the suffering Christ. Now this guy doesn't look like he's suffering at all. He seems completely in control and completely composed. And you think, well, maybe they're not very good with their wood carving. This is Christus triumphans. T-R-I, the triumphant Christ. T-R-I-U-M-P-H-A-N-S. Christus triumphans. In the Gospel according to St. Mark, the earliest Gospel, Jesus dies saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, Aramaic for, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's very strange to have that incorporated in the record, but everybody heard it, so they put it in. Paul's group, the Gospel according to Luke, was embarrassed by it. And in the Gospel according to St. Luke, after the two thieves have had their discussion, when he dies, he simply says, "Father, into thy hands I send my spirit." He's completely in control. All of this is on purpose. None of this about, my God, why have you forsaken me? And if you're starting to say to yourself, the Gospels completely contradict each other, yeah, they were written many years apart, and they spin doctor it to suit the audience. You should take a course on it. It'll fascinate you. Won't take away your faith either. It'll just reduce your faith in the Testament. Well, anyway, this is Christus Triumphans. Christus Patiens, like that, whoa, blood coming out and everything. It is only after St. Francis of Assisi in the early 1200s popularizes the idea that for Jesus' suffering to have been truly redemptive, he genuinely became a human being and he suffered terribly as an exchange for Adam's sin. Have to believe that. So until the 1200s, you've got Christus Patiens. And in fact, in the remaining part of the world, which is Roman, Constantinople, here in Hagia Sophia, you always have Christ the Emperor. This is a really tough state. And there Christ looks like a tough administrator, not a sweetheart at all. Constantinople isn't conquered by the Muslims until the middle 1400s. It's one of the birthplaces of Christianity, the country we know as Turkey. And it stays Christian for a long time. The Eastern Roman Empire. They're very fond of mosaics there. But again, we see the message is what counts. We're into the Middle Ages. We're going to go to a place called San Gimignano, which is, you can just make it S-T-G. I'm not going to ask you to spell that on your file. San Gimignano in Tuscany. The most beautiful part of Italy, outside of Florence. In fact, it's so beautiful it looks very much like Northern California. Golden rolling hills. Only on the top of a hill, you'll suddenly come into one of these medieval towns. This is looking out the window of just an average hotel. It's gorgeous, the tile roofs. The towers, of course, were built by different families that were fighting with each other, like the Sopranos, and they had to get up high to pour boiling oil down on each other when they were being attacked. When you go to Italy, and you will, you should, you'll go to Venice first, then you'll come over about 3 hours, 4 hours, or even 2 on the train to Florence in the middle, and you'll be full of tourists. But if you go 60 miles outside of Florence to Siena, or another 60 miles to San Gimignano, the tourists vanish. Because most of the tourists are just going once. It's like 90% of the tourist traffic is in Florence, where during the summer it's hard to find somebody who speaks Italian. But if you get outside, it becomes Italy again. Rolling hills, ancient buildings. We're in the Collegiata. You can just make it the church in St. G. And we're still in what are usefully called the Christian ages. It's right after Dante, and you'll see Dante's influence, and you'll understand now, better than most people, what you're looking at because you've read Dante. which is the whole soul of the Middle Ages. Question?
Would you pull out, or did you say?
I haven't explained it yet, but I'm about to. Is it on the, no, it's Middle Ages, all right. What we're looking at here are painted on the walls of the churches, and they're called frescoes, F-R-E-S-C-O. When paintings are done on canvas, you know, the way you're familiar with, that is called easel painting. I don't think I know how to spell easel. Maybe it's E-A-S-E-L. Easily, I could type it, but I can't spell it out loud. Anyway, easel painting doesn't exist. There are no private collectors. Art is done on the walls as what is called the Biblia Pauperum. Now, since you all speak Latin, just jot that down. Here is the creation of the world. Como Dio creó el mundo. El. Wow, I think it is el. Now, of course, in modern Latin, that would be il. Not Latin, Italian would be il mundo. They're still saying el. Okay? Never noticed that. Live and learn. Again, obviously, who here went to Sunday school, or who here was confirmed a Catholic? Okay, explain that.
Is it
Is it
Noah?
Noah? Does that look like Noah?
Well, Adam, but also all the animals.
I'm so happy I'm here for you children. Okay, come, but of course I'm cheating, I'm reading the caption. Come Dio da, how God gave ad Adamo, who is Adam, thank you. Adamo il dominio, the dominion del paradisio terrestre, of the terrestrial paradise. And this is the moment, now, again, I can see what great Bible scholars you are. But if you read the Old Testament, and you should, at the very beginning, in Genesis chapter 3, God creates, there's two versions of the creation, by the way, and they don't match at all. There's Genesis 1.1 up to Genesis 2.3. Anyway, 2.3, the second creation begins. 3 is the snake. Sorry, I didn't think I have to do this today. He makes Adam, and then he makes animals, and all the animals have their pairs, right? And he says, but for the man, no companion was, oh, I'm sorry, I screwed it all up. He makes man, and then he says, it's not good for the man to be alone. And so he creates, no, he creates animals. He creates animals. And the animals are all brought in front of Adam, who gives them names. And it says, apparently to the God's surprise, but for the man no companion was found. This puzzles the God. And so now, finally, he puts him in a sleep and creates woman to be his companion, his helpmate. This is the moment then. This is actually, I mean, as far as expressions, and think about this. The animals, I love that guy. He's probably never seen an elephant, so, you know. The animals are all extremely suspicious and disbelieving. God is saying, pick yourself a helpmate. And you can see from Adam's body language, what? This? And they seem rather incredulous too. You see? The expressions of it are priceless. They really knew their Bible. But what am I doing right now? I'm doing exactly what this picture was intended to be. It was called the Biblia Pauperum, the Bible of the poor. No offense. And here I am, using the audio-visual, well not audio, but using the visuals to explain the Bible, to teach Bible, as I just did, to the poor and illiterate students of San Francisco State University who cannot read the Bible. I have to get it this way. No, shut up. All right, what's the question?
Who are the people in that?
Ah, very good. These, do you ever hear the word cherub, plural cherubim? You think of cute little babies and everything. Actually, they were terrifying beings, the cherubim, and they're often pictured God floating, being held up by them, the cherubim. That's the little people in the back. So this is exactly the way that the poor priest, my predecessor, would have been standing on a morning looking at the blank faces and the people who, well, of course, you see, they couldn't read, and the church didn't want them to either. Do you know that until the Protestant Reformation, it was illegal in the Roman Catholic Church to read the Bible, because people pretty quickly started noticing the Bible contradicted each other. You wanted experts to interpret the Bible to the poor. So this is the Bible of the poor. That's what the fresco is for. There's no ideal here, even though they were surrounded by Roman sarcophagi and the ruins and the remnants of the Roman statues. They're not interested in it. It's just message. But I mean, they're really good, message and meaning. When you start looking at those dumbfounded faces, that's cute. These things, by the way, are life-size. They're up very high. And so, boys and girls, because no partner could be found, in the next slide, can you see Julia more clearly the way they sort of hold him up? In the next slide, they pull Eve out of Adam's side. They also taught Bible history. Excuse me, I'm going to need that. For instance, this is Moses with his rod of power and the Israelites fleeing from Pharaoh's army, and the Red Sea parts. The Israelites get through to dry ground, and then Moses turns around. Remember the sharpened moment? This is the moment. It goes down, and the seas come back and destroy them in the water. Floundering in the water with many large fishes. And these guys in the background here watching in amazement the whole thing. What's odd about it, of course, you wouldn't get it ordinarily. Of course, they're very careful. They'll have a little caption somewhere. It's not in this picture, though. Everybody is dressed, to make it more relevant to the people, everybody's dressed like 13th century. Like, you know, like the people in they're wearing armor that they would have seen in the field outside. They're not interested in doing authentic historical stuff. They just want to make the sale. And it's cute. This kid's eager to get going and he's whacking that donkey. The tenderness of the mothers, well caught. The animals, as always, have a lot of personality. There is no interest in realism. If they were halfway down in the waves, you wouldn't see it as clearly, so they kind of float right on the top to show they're dead. It's the message. The message just counts. For politically immoral people. And what is the message? Now you're already in a position better than the average tourist. I make jokes about you, but you're already in a position to understand what you're looking at here. In the Last Judgment, they're very fond of these. These are gigantic. Most of the ceiling is the Last Judgment. And where have you seen a Satan who has several mouths? And in one of them, the worst sinner is head first inside the mouth and being chewed. Dante. This is Dante's saying, Satan. They've been very influenced by Dante. After all, he pictured, he worked it out. And remember, Judas has his head inside the mouth. The others are just being chewed on the outside. Here, it's like his genitals. He hasn't slavishly followed. But they put down here what the different sins are. The people looking at it won't know Dante, but you do. And you know something important also, which is what's going on in these pictures. It is the idea that we talked about so much, the contrapasso, the fitting punishment, the punishment for the sin. The people, I mean, this was a time when people routinely starved. If the crops failed, like 5 years of drought here, everybody would be starving and eating acorns. Yet the priests have gotten fat. And so through all eternity, they're going to be tormented by devils looking at the food that they had gorged themselves with. Look at these guys. This is San Gimignano. And the priest could point to this on the wall. There's tons of it. And it was very popular. Remember, the Inferno was always more popular than all the rest of the stuff. Here, for instance, is a guy being strangled with a money bag. Avaro, avarice, greedy. See? Being strangled with his own money bag. This is another one, and because he's been a hoarder for all eternity, a devil will be shitting gold coins into his mouth. Everyone is punished in a fitting way. And you know why. Remember what's written over, I mean, it startles the people, the average tourist that goes in. Because Christianity now is all about mercy and love your neighbor and all that. But you know that in this era, and actually until very recently, Christianity is justitia. Justitia. Remember what's written over the entrance to hell. Per me si va la perduta gente, here the damned go. Per me si va nell'eterno dolore, to eternal pain. Dinanzi a me non fuor cose create, sed cose eterno ed io eterno duro. Justitia made me. Remember that? Fece me la divina potestate. Divine power made me. La somma sapienza, the highest wisdom. El primo amore, the primal love. But justice must be observed. Justitia mosse, justice moved my Maker. Now, something is so powerful that even God is moved by it. Justice. This is justice. The whole church is that original Christianity about justice. There wasn't going to be any heaven unless, it wasn't going to be a perfect world when Christ comes back unless the bad guys get punished. In proportion to the sin, but justice, justitia. So it isn't like crude savageness or anything. It is a philosophy. It is a different Christianity from the ones that you guys grew up with. And it goes on and on, all around you. And you might think, well, weren't they scared looking at this? No, they were very happy. These were the people who oppressed them. This guy has scorpions crawling all over him. This guy's been cut down the middle and his intestines are pulled out and they're being unrolled. I've often said that the artists of this era, actually until very recently, 200 years ago, really could do horrible scenes because they had seen people executed this way. One of the common punishments was to have people cut in half and have their intestines unrolled, or to be drawn and quartered, where they would be tied to 4 horses, and the 4 horses would pull them apart. And the beauty of this was that the person wasn't killed outright by it. His little stump was left there, and that way his genitals could be cut off and shoved in his mouth. He would live long enough for that. So they really get into it. They know what they're talking about. We're heading, though, we're in the 1300s, late 1300s. The Renaissance is going to be, it only started 50, 60 years in Florence, which is 120 miles away. But this is still what works. Here, for instance, is an adulteress. She's having the scarlet letter burned on her leg, being whipped. Notice, are Northern Italians naturally blonde? No. The blonde hair is a sign that she's lightened her hair with lemon juice, things like that, but also that maybe she's one of the real Northern Italians who are blonde. The barbarians that came in from the north are in the north of Italy. The people you think of as Italians are down in Sicily, and they're related to the Greeks, the small Robert De Niro dark-haired people. The people in the north are closer kin to the Germans than they are to those Greeks, and we know this genetically. So all of the good time girls are getting theirs. But also, what do you think is going on here? And it isn't just his imagination. They wouldn't have allowed the artist to be that free. The artist isn't like a creative genius or something. The church is laying out exactly what we have the contracts, exactly what he should paint, exactly how many ounces of gold he will get to gild the gold coins that are being shit into the guy's mouth. And he's working closely with the tradition in many churches around him. The idea of the original creative artist, these aren't signed. We know who did them, but only because we have contracts and things. They were just workers. What's going on here? Here is a man who's impaled on a spit. This devil is throwing a stick or a spit. Often it's a spit up this guy's ass, and it's coming out his mouth and going into that youngish-looking man's mouth. Can you read it? Well, you can. It says sodomito, S-O-D-O-M-I-T-O. What is sodomito? What is a sodomite? Sodom and Gomorrah. In the Old Testament, in Sodom and Gomorrah, they demand to have men brought out so they can screw them, this mob. And the man says, Lot says, I'll give you my daughters. And they said, no, we don't want the daughters, we want the men. Sodomite is an old term for homosexuals. Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the place that is burned to the ground. And Lot's wife is, everybody's told, flee and don't look back. Lot's wife turns back to look, and she's turned into a pillar of salt. So, for the fitting punishment, since assuming this guy has, well, you remember Brunetto Latini, the Circle of the Sodomites. Since supposedly he's had anal intercourse, he is impaled for eternity. It comes, and I've read an essay in which they said, since it comes out of it, the words have rubbed off, but x-rays show it says pueros, kid. His young boy companion has to suck the stick that goes in his mouth, obviously contrapasso for what he did in life for that guy. And the adulteress is being whipped just above it. The Bible of the poor. It gets really raunchy. Here again, the beautiful girl with long blonde hair, the bitch, is having fire breathed on her from the top. And here is being raped by a devil with this object. That'll show her. Why is she being raped? Nobody's written about this, and I should. Do you see this object? Anybody here in biology knows what a narwhale is? N-A-R-W-H-A-L-E. It's a kind of dolphin that has this spike on the head. It has it's rare, has a pointed spike on its head. And it has those interesting twists. It's like ivory. When the dolphin died and those things washed up, we think this gave rise to the legend of the unicorn. They imagined that there was a horse that had this on his head. They didn't know about the dolphins. Now the unicorn had an interesting story to him. A unicorn, to catch a unicorn, anybody know what the unicorn tapestries are about? Or how you catch a unicorn? The only way to catch a unicorn is to put a virgin in the forest. And the unicorn, with his phallic horn, will come to her and lay his head gently in her lap. And then you catch the unicorn. So, you see the irony here. Because she's been a slut, he takes the horn, which is the symbol of the unicorn and his virginity, and screws her with it. These things aren't casual or quick. There's all sorts of learning behind them. They are also very difficult to do. Oh wait, let me come back to this. They're also very difficult to do because it isn't until the 1400s that anybody starts to use oil paint. The way they do this is they prepare the wall, and the paint is made, you need a fixative for your colors. They used egg. They used egg white. They were even, Giannino Cennini's manual, get a city egg, not a country egg, which will give you a darker red. They use the egg, and the egg becomes part of the prepared wall. They put the plaster down wet, and then you paint on that. And you only have enough time, you can't go back. It's egg on plaster. Hard to do. And it's fixed into the wall. You don't get do-overs. With oil, you can do it over and over and over. And you can achieve all sorts of effects. This, by contrast, since we're past 1200s now, and we're past St. Francis of Assisi, Christus Patiens. See the difference? The suffering Christ. And this is in Siena. Oh, you really want to see Siena. 1 hour away by car, 60 miles west. It is, the Cathedral of Siena is miles better than anything else in Europe. Look at this. This is simply the pulpit. Every inch of it covered with bas-relief. Bas-relief is an important word. Write this down. B-A-S means low. B-A-S, relief, R-E-L-I-E-F. It's this kind of sculpture which pops out, but which isn't three-dimensional. So you can do entire scenes, you can do backgrounds and backdrops. Every inch of this thing is brilliant sculpture by the Pisano family. Entire families worked. And you see these lions at the base? Look at this object, for God's sake. My God, I mean, you know, just the stuff done here. The Cathedral of Siena. Oh, just a shot here. The guy who starts doing these big Bible of the Poor things perfectly is named Giotto. G-I-O-T-T-O. He's a contemporary of Dante's, and he works up in Florence. And you can see, this is what the Collegiata and all the others look like. Every inch of the place is visual support for the priest, is teaching a lesson. And it's beautiful. Oh, I'm sorry, not beautiful. It works. Here's with color. There were terrible earthquakes about 2 years ago, and one of Giotto's chapels like this completely fell down. This is Giotto, again, early 1300s. The Massacre of the Innocents. When, I'm not going to bother asking you, I'll just tell you. When Jesus is born, Herod is so worried about it, in one of the Gospels, not the others, that he orders all the little children killed, hoping to find Jesus, after he's had the wise men tell him. And here is the Massacre of the Innocents. There's Herod up there. They're standing on a mountain of dead babies. It's very stiff looking to us, but that's because Giotto is the first guy who is really starting to do away with hierarchical size, starting to say, this is drama, and I'm going to have real people in my drama. It's not going to be all over the place. It's not just a sign anymore with people floating on top of waves. You see the guy in the middle, he's holding a sword which has withered away over the many centuries, and the woman protesting and the baby fleeing, and he's got the baby by the ankle. This is when Mary's father has had his offering refused at the temple because he's childless. It's like bare stage. It isn't attempting to be the real world, but notice the look that the two guys exchange when they see him coming back. Giotto would have only painted the faces or the hands, the expressive parts. He had Scuola di Giotto. People fill in the rest of it. His dog greets him, and he doesn't even notice. Judas takes Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The torchlight, the wildness of it, Judas identifies Jesus to the Roman soldiers by rushing up to him and kissing him and saying, Rabboni, teacher, master. And the Roman soldiers go in and grab him. The faces staring, let's see if I have a close-up. I do. This is the only part that Giotto would have done. Jesus, in control, knowing all this must happen, looking him in the eyes, and Judas, the sharpened moment, just about to kiss him. Remember, the moment just before something happens is the most powerful, the most tension. So Giotto is a great dramatist. One of the ways you can tell if well, you guys wouldn't, if a painter is famous or important is if he has a nickname. Giotto is the nickname for a guy named Ambrogio. If he was relatively famous, he'd be called Ambrogiato, and if he's really famous, they just use Giotto. So this is the world just before the Renaissance. The reason we do interdisciplinary humanities is art can show you the power of something better than texts can. This is the world. Here are the beautiful girls being torn apart in a town not far from Florence. And then you get this. This is the Renaissance. Look at the difference in values. You have this. And in one generation, starting in Florence, where the Medicis, you've just written it down, the Medici family is achieving money and hiring people to do private work for them, you get Donatello's David. And you can feel what the word Renaissance means. Renaissance means rebirth. Renascimento, rebirth. Rebirth of what? Of the classical values. Instead of Justitia Mimosa and all that, back to the Medici sponsor this new feeling that this life, the beauty of this life, that Rome knew, who they look back to, that Rome knew was good. This is David, and he's standing on the head of Goliath. It's been cut off. And he's so gorgeous. This is by Donatello. You remember the famous names we got here, right? Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, and then there was, I mean, later went on to careers as Ninja Turtles. And then you remember you were puzzled by Donatello because, you know, you asked your mother what that was and she didn't know. Donatello was the sculptor, the great sculptor. Oh, let me get a drink, sorry. And believe it or not, this is the first freestanding, this is just a small statue in bronze that was in the Medici family's private collection. It is the first freestanding nude since the fall of Rome. It's just about 1,000 years, 410 AD, and this is the maybe 1,040 years later, something like that. Remember what we said the test of the freestanding statue was? From every side, it works. Look, the line of beauty, the S shape. They've been digging up classical statues. They're imitating them. And this symbols the victory of beauty over ugliness. And if you're fighting down the impression that Donatello's David is gay, you don't have to fight it down. Michelangelo was gay, Leonardo was gay. The Medicis were quite welcoming to a lot of that. Of course, if anybody publicly did it, they would have been burned at the stake. But this is private. Look at the pose, the way they've worked all the different interesting motions in it. Isn't that stiff frontalness anymore? Not they, him, Donatello. Meanwhile, 2 towns away, you've got a woman being raped by a devil's tail because of her blonde hair. This is what the whole world really still is like, the Christian world. The Renaissance is just starting in this one place, almost secretly. And this is Florence. The birth of Venus, which is really like the rebirth of Venus. This is Botticelli. He's a generation ahead of the big Ninja Turtle guys. Botticelli. This painting is so famous that I think you must know it. The birth of Venus. The rebirth of beauty and love into the world. This is one blonde, just a generation earlier. And now this. This is the start of the High Renaissance. Write down the birth of Venus, Botticelli, Botticelli, 1483. We know who the model was because she modeled for him all the time. The most beautiful woman in Florence. Remember, in a court, there was no Hollywood. If you were the great beauty, and there's always some, you didn't go to Hollywood and you didn't go onto the stage. You went to the court. So the nobles were intermarried with all these people. And this was the mistress of one of the Medici family. Her name was Simonetta Vespucci. Simonetta. Again, if you're in Florence and standing in front of this in the Uffizi, the guy from Stanford probably isn't going to know that. You can jump him down. La Bella Simonetta. She died very young, in her 20s, and she was so famous that the people petitioned the Medicis that when she was taken to the church to be buried, if she could be taken in an open casket so that they could admire her one last time before she was buried. La Bella Simonetta. Most of Botticelli's people look alike because he's her dream. He asked that he be buried at her feet when he died, and he is buried apparently very close to where, like he would be close to her feet. She was his ideal. Now, of course, they've already got the theory of the collecting the beauties. The painting is different slightly from La Bella Simonetta. There are more realistic ones of her. But something else that's interesting about this. Remember I mentioned the two different genetic strains that are in Italy? The northern barbarians had come down, and then there were the Sicilians. What's really interesting and so Renaissance about this is she doesn't actually look like a Greek statue. When you look at the Greek statues, they're smaller, stockier, the faces are rounder. This long face, this long, thin body is not Greek. It is a new ideal of beauty which lasts to this day. The Nordic female, the northern barbarian. You can't get hair that blonde just with lemon juice. This is what they're trying for. Our movie stars still look like this, and it's brand new. If you go back and look at the Greek and Roman statues of the great beauties, it's quite a different look. But that's so Renaissance. The idea that not only is Rome back, but maybe we're even a bit better. The three graces, a traditional pose, so you could do the front and the sides, also by Botticelli. And again, look at those faces, all reminiscent of her. Some people claim that Isabella d'Este might have been the subject, but I don't think so. Look at that hair. When you're looking at this, even more at this, you know you get the full force of what the Renaissance is. It isn't growing out of the Christian ages. All that's still going on around them. It is a revolution. Listen to me for another minute, don't back up. It is a revolution against them. It is stuff that the people who were accustomed to seeing those figures in the churches thought heretical and vile and sinful. The Renaissance only lasts a very few years. For students, we'll be doing this next time, it's lucky. It's High Renaissance is 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, going up to about 1520 or 1530 latest. And one of the reasons is that one of the guys who comes down from the northern provinces to see Rome kisses he's a scholar and a monk, kisses the ground when he gets there, and he finds all of this. Is a German monk named Martin Luther, and he's so disgusted and so horrified that after a while he starts the Protestant Reformation, which tears the church apart and ends all this. The Renaissance bloomed so soon that it caused this tremendous backlash, which we'll see in the art. Good. Give me the lights, please.